Sandra watched her daughter-in-law's face drain of color, the company lease trembling between her perfectly manicured fingers. Across town, Sandra's military medals hung in the quiet office of the building Rachel had just discovered she didn't own but merely rented from the burden she had mocked at Sunday dinner. They thought a veteran's sacrifice earned only polite tolerance. Sandra taught them what it really earned: respect. Before we dive into this shocking story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The china clinked, too, loudly in the formal dining room, each tap of silverware against plate like a tiny explosion in the tense silence. Sandra Miller sat rigidly at the far end of her son's expansive dining table, watching steam rise from a roast she had barely touched. The chandeliers, ostentatious crystal things her daughter-in-law had ordered from some European designer, cast fractured light across the family gathering. "The gravy is a little thick," Rachel commented, not to anyone in particular, but with a quick glance toward Sandra. "I told Elena to watch the roux, but you know how hard it is to find good help these days." Sandra's son Michael nodded absently, scrolling through his phone beneath the table, his attention elsewhere as usual. Their two teenage children, Aiden and Mia, slumped in their chairs, lost in their own worlds, communicating in the monosyllabic language of the perpetually bored. Sandra cut a small piece of roast beef, noting how Rachel watched her with barely concealed impatience. At 64, Sandra kept herself fit, a habit from her 22 years in the Army. Her silver hair was cropped in a practical bob, her posture military straight despite the old back injury from her second deployment. She wore simple clothes, pressed, slacks and a blue blouse, a stark contrast to Rachel's designer dress and elaborate jewelry. "Mom, we wanted to discuss something with you," Michael finally said, setting his phone down and sharing a loaded glance with Rachel. The teenagers perked up slightly, sensing drama. Sandra set her fork down carefully. "Of course," Rachel cleared her throat. "We've been thinking about the future. Planning, you know." Her voice adopted that syrupy tone reserved for difficult conversations. "The kids are getting older, college is coming up, and our expenses are complicated." "I see," Sandra said, though she didn't. "Not yet." "Your retirement situation," Michael continued, not quite meeting her eyes. "We're concerned. The military pension only goes so far, and with healthcare costs rising." Rachel jumped in, evidently tired of circling the point. "What Michael is trying to say is that we've looked into some excellent assisted living communities. Very modern, lots of activities, people your age." Sandra's spine stiffened. "I'm sorry?" "Mom, you're living in that big house all alone," Michael said. "It's too much space, too much maintenance." "My house is perfectly manageable," Sandra replied evenly. "I've lived there for 15 years, since your father died." Rachel sighed dramatically. "Sandra, be practical. You're not getting any younger. What if you fall? What if something happens? You'd be a burden on all of us." The word hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. "Burden. Rachel," Michael muttered, looking uncomfortable. "What?" "I'm just saying what we're all thinking," Rachel continued, warming to her topic. "Look, the property market is hot right now. If you sell, you could fund a really nice arrangement. The Willows has an excellent memory care unit I don't have." "Memory issues," Sandra interrupted, her voice calm but steel-edged. Rachel laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. "Not yet. But at your age, it's just a matter of time." She turned to the teenagers. "Don't you think Grandma would be happier with people her own age, instead of rattling around in that big house?" Mia shrugged uncomfortably. Aiden stared at his plate. Sandra looked at her family, her son who couldn't meet her eyes, her grandchildren shrinking from conflict, and Rachel, whose smile didn't reach her calculating eyes. The burning feeling in Sandra's chest wasn't anger. It was clarity. "I'm not selling my home," she said quietly. Rachel's smile tightened. Don't be selfish, Sandra. Think about the family. Think about the burden you'll become. There it was again. Burden. 22 years in the Army, including 3 tours in combat zones. A bronze star that sat in a shadow box in her study. The years spent raising Michael alone after Jack died of a heart attack too young. The mortgage she'd helped Michael and Rachel secure for this very house when his credit wasn't good enough. All reduced to one word: burden. I should go, Sandra said, folding her napkin precisely and placing it beside her barely touched dinner. Mom, don't be dramatic, Michael sighed. Rachel's just being practical. Yes, I imagine she is, Sandra replied, rising from her chair with dignity. Thank you for dinner. The drive home was a blur, the autumn streets of Harleston sliding past in a wash of streetlights and fallen leaves. Sandra's hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, her knuckles white against her skin. By the time she pulled into her driveway, the initial shock had crystallized into something harder, clearer. She sat in her car for a long moment, staring at the house she'd shared with Jack, where she'd finished raising Michael, where she'd built a life after hanging up her uniform. Inside, Sandra moved through the quiet rooms with purpose. This house wasn't too big. It was exactly right. The downstairs office she'd converted into a bedroom after her back surgery. The kitchen where she still cooked Sunday meals no one came to anymore. The study where Jack's books lined the walls, alongside her military commendations. She paused at the bronze star in its simple frame. Awarded for leading her unit through an ambush, carrying a wounded soldier to safety under heavy fire. Below it sat a folded flag and Jack's service medals. He'd been Army too. It was how they met. 2 soldiers who understood sacrifice, a burden. The word throbbed like an old wound. Sandra sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She didn't feel the hot tear that slid down her cheek and splashed onto the keyboard. Instead, she felt something else awakening. Not anger, but resolve. The same calm, strategic thinking that had served her through 2 decades of military service. She opened her investment portfolio and studied the numbers glowing on the screen. Beside it, she pulled up the folder marked Holdings. Sandra had always been careful with money. Military life taught you to prepare for all contingencies. Jack had been the same way. Together, they had quietly built a financial foundation most people wouldn't expect from career soldiers. The flagship of their investments sat in the commercial real estate folder. A modern office building in downtown Harleston, purchased 10 years ago when the market had dipped. Sandra had used her military pension as collateral for the loan. The building now housed 6 businesses, all paying reliable rent that provided a comfortable supplement to her pension. One of those businesses was RD Creative Solutions, Rachel's marketing firm. Sandra clicked through the lease agreement, noting the renewal date coming up in 3 months. Rachel had founded her company 5 years ago, leasing the entire 3rd floor of the building through a property management company Sandra used to maintain her privacy. Rachel had no idea her mother-in-law owned the building where she built her empire, as she liked to call it, a burden. The word seemed almost comical now. Sandra closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen, making herself a cup of tea with methodical precision. She wasn't angry. She was something more dangerous. Disappointment crystallized into determination. For the next 2 weeks, Sandra went about her life as usual. She attended her veterans support group on Tuesdays, where she mentored younger female vets transitioning to civilian life. She volunteered at the VA hospital on Thursdays. She tended her garden and read the books she enjoyed. Michael called twice, leaving voicemails that danced around an apology without ever quite arriving at one. Mom, Rachel didn't mean it like that. Just trying to look out for you. Call me back. Sandra didn't. On a crisp October morning, Sandra dressed with particular care. Tailored charcoal slacks, a burgundy blouse, and the small gold pins she'd earned in the service, subtle but present. She drove downtown and parked in the visitor section of her building. The glass and steel structure gleamed in the autumn sunlight. Modern but understated, just as she'd specified when overseeing the renovation after purchase. The security guard nodded respectfully. "Morning, Colonel Miller." "Morning, James. Is Ms. Delaney in today?" "Yes, ma'am. Arrived about an hour ago." Sandra took the elevator to the 4th floor where the property management company kept its offices. Lisa Delaney greeted her with a warm handshake, closing her office door for privacy. "What can I do for you today, Colonel?" Lisa had been managing Sandra's property for 8 years. She was efficient, discreet, and, most importantly, loyal. "I'd like to review the lease renewal terms for RD Creative Solutions," Sandra said, seating herself comfortably. Lisa raised an eyebrow but asked no questions as she pulled up the file on her computer. "They've been good tenants. Always pay on time. The lease is up for renewal in January." "I'd like to make some changes," Sandra said calmly. "First, I'd like to remove the management buffer. From now on, I'll be directly listed as the property owner on all communications." Lisa's fingers paused over her keyboard. "That's a significant change to your usual arrangement." "Yes," Sandra agreed. "I'd also like to review the market rates for comparable properties downtown." Lisa typed rapidly, then turned the screen so Sandra could see. "We're currently about 15% below market for similar spaces. We could justify an increase, especially given the improvements we made to the HVAC system last year." Sandra nodded, studying the numbers. "Prepare a new lease agreement with my name clearly indicated as property owner. Set the rate at current market value, no discount, and add a clause requiring quarterly meetings between tenant and landlord." Lisa looked at her carefully. "May I ask what prompted this change? You've always preferred to remain anonymous with your tenants." Sandra smiled slightly. "Let's just say I'm reconsidering the value of visibility." On her way out, Sandra took the elevator to the 3rd floor. She'd never visited Rachel's business before, maintaining her distance as she did with all her tenants. The doors opened onto a reception area decorated in minimalist style, all white furniture and abstract art in muted colors. "Can I help you?" asked a young receptionist. "Just looking around," Sandra replied pleasantly. "I'm the building owner, Colonel Sandra Miller." The girl's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, I didn't know. Would you like me to get Ms. Delaney?" "No need." "Is Rachel Miller in?" "Mrs. Miller is in a meeting, but that's fine. I'll be in touch soon. Have a good day." Sandra left, satisfied with the seeds she had planted. The receptionist would mention her visit to Rachel. Rachel would dismiss it initially, perhaps even forget it. But in 3 months, when the lease renewal arrived with Sandra's name clearly marked as property owner, the memory would resurface with new significance. Back home, Sandra made herself a light lunch and ate it on her patio, watching birds flit through her garden. Her phone buzzed with a text from one of the young veterans she mentored. Tamara had gotten the job she'd been hoping for. Sandra smiled, texting back her congratulations. That evening, she opened the wooden chest where she kept Jack's things. His dress uniform. The letters they'd exchanged during deployments. Photos of a younger Sandra in desert camo, standing tall despite the heavy gear and blistering heat. She ran her fingers over their wedding photo, both of them in uniform, young and serious and hopeful. "A burden," she whispered to Jack's smiling face. "That's what your son's wife thinks I am." She could almost hear his response, the quiet rumble of his laugh. "Then I guess it's time for some tactical maneuvers, Colonel." Sandra nodded, a plan forming with military precision. Not revenge, she was beyond that. This was about recognition, about respect, about teaching a necessary lesson about value and sacrifice. In her study, she opened a fresh notebook and began writing. At the top of the page, she wrote, "Operation Recognition." Below it, she listed phases with military efficiency. Phase 1. Intelligence. Gathering Phase 2, Strategic Positioning Phase 3, Controlled Reveal Phase 4, Aftermath Management. Sandra worked late into the night, the glow of her desk lamp illuminating pages of careful notes. By morning, she had a complete strategy, measured, proportional, and designed to achieve maximum effect with minimal collateral damage. For the first time since that disastrous dinner, Sandra felt fully herself again. This wasn't about hurt feelings or wounded pride. This was about correcting a fundamental misperception, one that dishonored not just her service, but every woman who had ever worn the uniform and been dismissed afterward. A burden carried the weight, a soldier redistributed it, and Colonel, Sandra Miller had spent a lifetime learning how to shoulder heavy loads and keep marching forward. Rachel was about to learn the difference. Phase 1 of Operation Recognition began the following Tuesday. Sandra arrived at her veterans support group early, setting up chairs in the community center's meeting room with practiced efficiency. Today's session focused on financial independence for female veterans, a topic Sandra had suggested months ago. "Colonel, need a hand?" asked Tamara Jenkins, a former Army medic in her 30s. Despite leaving the service 5 years ago, she still addressed Sandra by rank, a habit many of the younger veterans maintained. "Thanks, Tamara. How's the new position working out?" Tamara beamed. "Amazing. The hospital administration actually values my combat medical experience. First time I haven't felt like I need to downplay my service to fit in." Sandra nodded, understanding perfectly. Civilian life requires its own kind of adaptation. "Speaking of which," Tamara said, lowering her voice, "I hate to ask, but that property management contact you mentioned last month?" "Lisa Delaney," Sandra confirmed. "Did you call her?" "Yes, and she's been incredibly helpful. My husband and I are looking at one of the retail spaces in your building next week. If we can secure the lease, our physical therapy practice could finally happen." Sandra squeezed the younger woman's shoulder. "Lisa will treat you fairly. Military discount included." "That means everything, Colonel. Most of the other landlords downtown want triple what we can afford." As the room filled with women of various ages, all veterans, all navigating the complicated terrain of post-military life, Sandra observed them with quiet pride. Some still wore their hair in regulation-acceptable styles. Others had embraced wildly different looks after years of conformity. All carried themselves with the distinct bearing that military service imprinted. During the meeting, Sandra spoke less than usual, listening intently as the women discussed financial challenges. When her turn came, she was concise. "The civilian world often undervalues what we bring to the table," she said. "Our discipline, our strategic thinking, our ability to function under pressure. Don't let anyone convince you these skills aren't worth market rate or higher." Later, as they were cleaning up, Tamara approached again. "Everything okay, Colonel? You seem, I don't know, more intense than usual." Sandra considered the question. "Have you ever been called a burden, Tamara?" The younger woman's expression hardened. "More times than I can count. My mother-in-law thinks my PTSD makes me an unstable parent. My former boss said my medical appointments were disrupting workplace efficiency." "And how did you respond?" Tamara's smile was sharp. "I started my own business with my husband. Now I get to decide what constitutes workplace efficiency." Sandra nodded approvingly. "Exactly. You repositioned." That evening, Sandra made another strategic move. She called her son, accepting his invitation to dinner the following weekend, this time at a restaurant rather than their home. Michael sounded relieved, clearly assuming the previous conflict had been forgotten. Phase 2 began on Thursday. Sandra arrived at the VA hospital for her volunteer shift wearing her old service jacket. Not the full uniform, just the structured, olive drab coat with her name tape and rank insignia still attached. She rarely wore anything identifying her as a veteran during these visits, preferring to blend in. Today was different. "Looking sharp, Colonel," remarked Dr. Winters, the head of the Women's Health Department. Special occasion? Recognition, Sandra replied cryptically. Her volunteer duties took her through various departments, delivering mail, sitting with isolated patients, helping with paperwork. In the physical therapy wing, she paused to watch a session in progress. A young female veteran, barely 30, was learning to walk with a prosthetic leg, her face tight with concentration. "You've got this, Sergeant," Sandra said as she passed. The woman looked up, noting Sandra's jacket and the rank it displayed. She straightened instinctively, her posture improving. "Yes, ma'am. That small exchange, the automatic respect, the shared understanding, reminded Sandra exactly why she was proceeding with her plan. Some things needed to be visible to be valued. After her shift, Sandra drove downtown. She parked in her reserved space, one she rarely used, and entered her building through the main lobby rather than the private entrance. The security guard looked surprised. "Twice in 1 week, Colonel. To what do we owe the pleasure?" "Just checking on my investment, James." Sandra took the elevator to the 3rd floor again. This time, she walked past the reception desk with a polite nod and continued down the hallway, observing everything. The space was impressive. Open-concept workstations for junior staff, glass-walled offices for senior positions, and at the end of the corridor, a corner office with Rachel Miller, CEO, etched on a frosted glass door. Through the glass, Sandra could see her daughter-in-law standing behind her desk, gesturing emphatically while speaking to 2 younger employees who were frantically taking notes. Rachel's office was meticulously designed, awards displayed prominently, furniture that Sandra recognized from high-end catalogs, an original painting on the wall that had likely cost more than most people's monthly rent. All housed in a building. Rachel had no idea was owned by the woman she had dismissed as a future burden. Sandra didn't interrupt. She simply observed, then continued her tour of the floor, noting areas where maintenance would soon be required. The HVAC system would need work again before summer. The bathrooms were due for modernization, all improvements that would justify the market rate increase in the new lease. On her way out, Sandra stopped at the reception desk. "Please tell Mrs. Miller that Colonel Miller stopped by. No need to mention it was me specifically. Just Colonel Miller." The receptionist looked confused but nodded. "Yes, ma'am." That night, Sandra received a text from Michael. "Mom, Rachel mentioned some colonel was asking about her at work today. Do you know anything about that?" Sandra replied simply, "The military is a small community." She could almost feel Michael's confusion through the phone. Good. Let him wonder. Let them both wonder. The following morning, Sandra met with her financial advisor, a former military intelligence officer who had transitioned to wealth management after retirement. "I'd like to restructure some of my holdings," she explained, sliding a folder across his desk. "Specifically, I want to establish a veterans business incubator." Martin raised his eyebrows as he reviewed her proposal. "Using the 4th floor of your building? That's prime real estate, Sandra. The current tenant's lease expires next month. They're relocating to a larger space across town. And you want to convert it to subsidized office space for veteran-owned businesses?" He frowned. "That's going to impact your revenue stream." "Not necessarily," Sandra countered. "I've run the numbers. With the market rate adjustment to the 3rd floor tenant, we can offset the reduced income from the 4th floor. Plus, there are tax advantages to structuring it as a nonprofit initiative." Martin studied her for a moment. "This is sudden. What prompted the change?" Sandra met his gaze steadily. "Let's just say I'm reevaluating what constitutes a worthwhile investment." By the time Saturday arrived, Sandra had laid all the groundwork for Phase 3. She dressed carefully for dinner with Michael and Rachel, charcoal slacks again, but this time with a silk blouse in deep crimson and a simple gold necklace Jack had given her on their 20th anniversary. Her makeup was subtle but precise, her silver hair freshly trimmed. The restaurant was one of Harleston's finest. Rachel's choice, no doubt. all sleek modern decor and hushed conversations beneath ambient lighting. Sandra arrived exactly on time, not surprised to find Michael already seated alone. "Mom?" He stood to hug her, his embrace awkward and brief. "You look nice." "Thank you." "Rachel running late?" "Client emergency," Michael explained, checking his watch. "She should be here soon," Sandra nodded, unsurprised. Rachel's client emergencies were notorious for arising whenever family obligations became inconvenient. They ordered drinks, a glass of Cabernet for Sandra, scotch for Michael. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably until Michael cleared his throat. "About last time." "Let's wait for Rachel," Sandra interrupted smoothly. "I'd prefer to have this conversation once." Michael looked relieved at the reprieve. He filled the time with safe topics: the weather, a basketball game, Mia's college applications. Sandra listened politely, offering appropriate responses while observing her son. He had Jack's height and build, but none of his father's steady calm. Michael had always been restless, easily influenced, especially by strong personalities like Rachel. Rachel arrived 20 minutes late in a flurry of apologies and air kisses. "Sandra, you look well," she said, her tone suggesting mild surprise, as if she'd expected to find her mother-in-law noticeably deteriorated since their last meeting. "Thank you, Rachel. How's business?" Something flickered across Rachel's face. Wariness. "Perhaps?" "Thriving. We just landed the Westfield account." She signaled for the waiter. "I need a martini, extra olives." Once drinks were served and appetizers ordered, Rachel turned to Sandra with a practiced smile. "Michael mentioned you volunteered at the VA this week?" "I volunteer every Thursday," Sandra replied. "Have for the past 7 years." "Right, of course." Rachel nodded vaguely. "Someone mentioned a colonel was asking about me at work. Any idea who that might be?" Sandra sipped her wine. "I imagine it was me." Michael's fork clattered against his plate. "You?" "Colonel Sandra Miller, U.S. Army, retired," Sandra said calmly. 22 years of service. Final rank 06. Rachel laughed, a sharp, uncomfortable sound. "Why would you come to my office?" "Professional interest," Sandra replied. "I like to stay informed about the businesses in my building." There was a beat of silence as her words registered. "Your building?" Michael repeated slowly. Sandra nodded. "The Harleston Professional Center on Oakwood Avenue. I purchased it 10 years ago as an investment property." Rachel's martini glass froze, halfway to her lips, olive-infused liquid trembling dangerously close to the rim. "That's not possible. Our building is owned by Meridian Properties Management." "Meridian manages the property," Sandra corrected, her tone measured and precise. "I own it. Have since 2013. Michael's face had drained of color, his scotch forgotten. "Mom, are you saying you're Rachel's landlord? That can't be right." Sandra reached into her handbag and withdrew a slim leather portfolio. She unzipped it with deliberate calm and extracted a single folded document, which she placed on the table between them. "The deed," she said simply. "You'll note the owner of record is S.J. Miller Holdings, LLC. That's my company, established after your father died. The J is for Jack." Rachel snatched up the document, her manicured fingers creasing the heavy paper as she scanned its contents. Her professional composure slipped with each line she read, her expression cycling rapidly through disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror. "I don't understand," Rachel stammered. "Why wouldn't you tell us?" Sandra took a small sip of her wine. "Why would I? My investments are my business. Just as your comments about my being a burden were apparently your business." The restaurant continued its elegant evening rhythm around them. Soft clinks of silverware, murmured conversations, waiters gliding between tables with practiced grace. At their table, however, time seemed suspended in amber, trapping them in the moment of revelation. Michael recovered first, reaching for his scotch with a slightly unsteady hand. "Mom, about what Rachel said." "You need to understand," Rachel interrupted, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "We were only thinking about your well-being. The house is so large for one person, and at your age—" "My age?" Sandra repeated softly. "Yes, let's discuss that. At my age, I own a commercial property worth approximately $7 million. At my age, I maintain a diversified investment portfolio that generates more annual income than your entire household. At my age, I volunteer 20 hours a week helping veterans who serve this country, many of whom are now struggling with disabilities, PTSD, or homelessness." She paused, allowing her words to settle between them like stones, dropping into still water. "And at my age," she continued, "I find I have very little patience left for disrespect disguised as concern." The waiter approached with their appetizers, sensing the tension but maintaining professional detachment as he arranged the plates. Rachel waited until he departed before leaning forward, her business negotiation face firmly in place. "Sandra, surely we can discuss this reasonably. I had no idea about your financial situation. If you'd known I owned your building, you wouldn't have called me a burden?" Sandra asked. "That's precisely the problem, Rachel. Respect shouldn't be contingent on what someone owns. It should be based on who they are." Michael flinched. "Mom, please. Rachel didn't mean—" "I'm quite certain she meant exactly what she said," Sandra replied calmly. "And it's important that we're all clear about where we stand." Sandra carefully speared a piece of calamari with her fork. "Your lease is up for renewal in January, Rachel. You'll be receiving the new terms next week." Rachel's carefully constructed composure fractured. "Are you threatening my business?" "Not at all. I'm simply informing my tenant about standard business procedures. The new lease will reflect current market rates and will list me, not Meridian, as the direct owner and contact. I believe in transparency." Michael's expression hardened with something like anger, or perhaps it was fear. "This feels vindictive, Mom." Sandra placed her fork down with military precision. "If I were being vindictive, Michael, I would have waited until December 30th to inform Rachel that her lease wouldn't be renewed at all. The fourth floor is currently being converted into a business incubator for veteran-owned startups. I could easily justify expanding that project to include the third floor." Rachel paled visibly. "You wouldn't." "I considered it," Sandra acknowledged. "But ultimately, that wouldn't serve my purposes. I don't want to destroy your business, Rachel. I simply want you to understand something fundamental about the word burden." She reached for her wine, her hand steady. "A burden is something carried involuntarily. I have never been a burden to either of you because I have never needed your support, financial, physical, or otherwise. What I have been is generous. There's a critical difference." The remainder of the dinner passed in strained conversation. Rachel picked at her salmon, her appetite apparently diminished. Michael attempted to salvage the evening with forced joviality that fell flat against the new reality between them. Sandra ate methodically, neither rushing nor lingering. When the fee check arrived, Rachel reached for it, an obvious peace offering. Sandra intercepted it smoothly. "My treat," she said, sliding her credit card into the leather folio without looking at the total. "You don't have to—" Rachel began. "I know," Sandra replied. "That's rather the point." Outside the restaurant, the October evening had turned chilly. Sandra pulled her cashmere wrap closer around her shoulders as they stood awkwardly on the sidewalk. "Will you come for Thanksgiving?" Michael asked, breaking the silence. "The kids would love to see you." "I'll have to check my calendar," Sandra replied. "I'm considering volunteering at the VA that day. Many veterans don't have family to celebrate with." Rachel shifted uncomfortably beside Michael. "We could volunteer with you. Make it a family activity." Sandra regarded her daughter-in-law thoughtfully. That's an interesting suggestion, Rachel. I'll let you know. She turned to go, then paused, looking back at them. One more thing. I've established a college fund for Aiden and Mia. It should cover 4 years at any university they choose, including graduate school if they're interested. I'd appreciate if you wouldn't mention it to them yet. I'd prefer they focus on earning scholarships through their own merit first. Michael's mouth opened, then closed without words. Good night, Sandra said simply, then walked to her car with measured steps, her back straight, her head high. The following Thursday, Sandra arrived at the VA hospital for her regular volunteer shift to find Rachel waiting in the lobby. Her daughter-in-law was dressed in understated business casual, a far cry from her usual designer outfits, and looked distinctly uncomfortable among the veterans and medical personnel moving purposefully through the space. Rachel, Sandra acknowledged, stopping before her. This is unexpected. Rachel stood, clutching her handbag like a shield. I thought, I'd like to see what you do here, if that's okay. Sandra studied her for a moment, noting the lack of makeup, the sensible shoes, the effort to blend in rather than stand out. It was a small gesture, but not insignificant. Very well, she said finally. I'm in the women's ward today. Follow me. She led Rachel through security and down several corridors, nodding to staff members who greeted her by rank. In the elevator, Rachel broke the silence. Everyone knows you here. I've been coming every week for 7 years, Sandra replied. Consistency matters in this environment. The women's ward was quieter than other sections of the hospital. Sandra signed in at the nurse's station, introduced Rachel as a guest volunteer, and collected her assignment sheet for the day. We have 3 new admissions, the charge nurse informed her. One's particularly withdrawn. Captain Manning in room 412. Combat trauma, multiple surgeries, not engaging with staff. Sandra nodded. I'll start there. At room 412, Sandra knocked softly before entering. Rachel followed hesitantly, hanging back near the door. A woman in her 30s lay in the bed, her right leg elevated, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Captain Manning? Sandra approached the bed, her posture straight, but not rigid. I'm Colonel Miller. I volunteer here on Thursdays. The younger woman's eyes flickered briefly toward Sandra, then back to the ceiling. Ma'am, she acknowledged tonelessly. Sandra pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat. Afghanistan or Iraq? Afghanistan. Kandahar. IED. Sandra nodded. I was in Kandahar in '05, hot as hell and twice as dusty. A ghost of a smile touched the captain's lips. Still is, ma'am. For the next 30 minutes, Sandra engaged the wounded officer in conversation. Sparse at first, gradually more animated. She didn't offer platitudes or forced cheerfulness, just straightforward questions and occasional shared experiences. By the time they left, Captain Manning had agreed to attend physical therapy that afternoon, something she'd been refusing for 3 days. In the hallway, Rachel let out a breath she seemed to have been holding. That was, how did you know what to say to her? I didn't, Sandra replied, consulting her assignment sheet for the next room. I just knew what not to say. No one wants to hear that everything happens for a reason when they've lost a limb. Throughout the afternoon, Rachel observed as Sandra moved from room to room, changing TV channels for patients with limited mobility, writing emails dictated by those unable to type, simply sitting in companionable silence with others. Between visits, Rachel's questions became more thoughtful, less defensive. Do you ever get overwhelmed by all this? She asked, as they took a brief break in the staff lounge. Sandra considered the question. Sometimes. But then I remember what my drill sergeant told me my first week of basic. The only way out is through. These women are going through. The least I can do is go through with them for a few hours a week. Rachel twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit Sandra had noticed years ago. I received the new lease terms yesterday. I assumed you had. The rate increase is significant. Sandra sipped her coffee, It's market rate. Nothing more, nothing less. And the quarterly meetings with the landlord? Standard procedure for my properties, Sandra replied. I like to stay informed. Rachel's shoulders slumped slightly. Are you going to tell everyone at my company that you own the building? That's not my intention, Sandra said. Though I won't hide it if asked directly. I don't make a habit of lying, Rachel. The implication hung between them, unspoken but understood. Rachel had received the message. I underestimated you, Rachel admitted finally. Yes, Sandra agreed. You did. The following week brought the first significant frost of the season. Sandra spent the morning covering her perennials and harvesting, the last of her herb garden before the cold could claim it. The physical work felt good, stretching muscles that remembered younger days, hands in the soil connecting her to something enduring. Her cell phone rang as she was brewing mint tea from the freshly harvested leaves. Michael's number. Hello, Michael. Mom. His voice sounded strained. We need to talk about this lease situation with Rachel. Sandra cradled the phone between her ear and shoulder as she poured hot water over the mint leaves. What about it? The increase is going to strain her business. 20% is excessive. It's the current market rate, Sandra replied calmly. I've charged the same to all my tenants. But they're not family, Michael insisted. Couldn't you make an exception? Sandra carried her tea to the kitchen table and sat down. Through the window, she could see frost melting on the grass, sunlight gradually reclaiming the yard. Do you remember when you wanted to buy your house, Michael? When the bank wouldn't approve your loan because of your credit history? A pause. That was different. Was it? You came to me for help. I co-signed your mortgage without hesitation. I didn't charge you interest on the down payment I provided. I didn't expect anything in return except perhaps gratitude. And I am grateful, Michael insisted. But this feels like punishment. It's not punishment, Michael. It's reality. Rachel runs a business. Businesses pay rent. The fact that she's been enjoying below-market rates for years due to an arrangement she wasn't aware of doesn't entitle her to continue receiving special treatment. Mom, if Rachel's business can't sustain market rate rent, Sandra continued, then perhaps she should reevaluate her business model. That's what a responsible CEO would do. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Sandra wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Michael spoke again, his voice quieter. Rachel told me about her visit to the VA. Did she? She said it changed. How she sees you. Sandra sipped her tea, letting the mint's sharpness bloom across her tongue. People often see what they expect to see, Michael. Your father understood that. It's why he never corrected civilians who assumed he was just a gym teacher rather than a decorated officer. He knew his value didn't depend on their recognition. Dad was different, Michael said. He never cared what people thought. Neither do I, Sandra replied. But I do care about respect. Not because I need it, but because it's what I've earned. November arrived with a bitter cold snap that painted Harleston in shades of frost and iron-gray skies. Sandra increased her volunteer hours at the VA, now spending 3 days a week navigating the fluorescent-lit hallways where wounded warriors fought different kinds of battles. Captain Manning had been discharged, but Sandra still checked in with her twice weekly by phone, ensuring her transition home was progressing. On a particularly frigid Tuesday morning, Sandra's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Colonel. Miller, this is Diane Winters from the VA. Could you call me at your convenience? I have a proposal to discuss. Sandra recognized the name. Dr. Winters ran the women's health department where Sandra often volunteered. She called immediately. Colonel Miller. Dr. Winters greeted her warmly. Thank you for getting back to me so quickly. Of course. What can I do for you? I'll get straight to the point. We're launching a new transition program for female veterans, focusing on professional development and civilian reintegration. Given your background and dedication to the veteran community, we'd like you to consider heading up the program. Sandra's fingers tightened around her phone. I'm flattered, but I'm not a medical professional. This isn't primarily a medical program, Dr. Winters explained. It's about mentorship, networking, and resource coordination. Your military leadership experience combined with your business acumen makes you uniquely qualified. Plus, the veterans here already respect you enormously. Would this be a voluntary position? No, it's a paid directorship. Part-time, 20 hours weekly, with flexibility in scheduling. The funding's already approved through a special congressional allocation for women veterans services. Sandra found herself instinctively straightening her posture, despite being alone in her kitchen. Old habits. I'd like to see the program outline before making a decision. Of course, I'll email it over today. We're hoping to launch by January. January. The same month Rachel's new lease would take effect. The synchronicity wasn't lost on Sandra. After ending the call, Sandra moved to her study and seated herself at her desk, gazing at the wall of photographs and commendations that chronicled her military career. Jack smiled at her from several frames: their wedding day in uniforms, a rare vacation in Germany, his retirement ceremony. She traced her fingers over his face in the last photo taken before his heart attack. Still strong, still vital. Retirement barely begun. What do you think, Jack? She murmured. Another mission at my age? She could almost hear his response. Age is just a number, Colonel. Capability is what matters. The proposal arrived in her email an hour later. Sandra printed it out. She still preferred paper for important documents, and spent the afternoon reviewing the program details with her characteristic thoroughness. The initiative was well conceived, addressing gaps Sandra herself had noticed in the support system for female veterans. The position would allow her to shape policy while directly mentoring transitioning service members. It wasn't just meaningful work. It was necessary work. By evening, she had drafted her acceptance letter, outlining several suggestions for program enhancements based on her experience. She would send it tomorrow, after sleeping on the decision, as was her habit with important matters. As darkness settled over Harleston, Sandra's doorbell rang unexpectedly. Through the peephole, she was surprised to see Mia, her granddaughter, standing on the porch, hugging herself against the cold. No car visible in the driveway. Sandra opened the door immediately. Mia, is everything all right? The teenager stepped inside, bringing a gust of cold air with her. At 17, Mia had Jack's height and Michael's features, but something entirely her own in her direct gaze. She unwound a scarf from her neck, revealing cheeks reddened by the cold. I walked here, she said, answering the unasked question. From the bus stop. In this weather? Come in, let me make you some tea. Sandra led her to the kitchen, concern mounting. Mia had never visited alone before. The girl perched awkwardly on a kitchen stool, watching as Sandra filled the kettle. I didn't tell Mom and Dad I was coming. Sandra nodded, unsurprised. Any particular reason for the secrecy? Mia twisted the end of her scarf between her fingers. They've been fighting. About money, I think. Mom's been stressed about work stuff. The kettle whistled. Sandra poured hot water over chamomile tea bags in 2 mugs before responding. I'm sorry to hear that. Business can be challenging. It's more than that, Mia continued, wrapping her cold hands around the warm mug. I heard them talking about you, about some building you own. Sandra sat across from her granddaughter. Your mother's company leases office space in a building I purchased as an investment several years ago. Mia's eyes widened. Mom works in your building. Does she know? She does now. The girl processed this, brows furrowed in concentration. Is that why Mom suddenly volunteered at the VA hospital? And why Dad keeps saying we need to respect Grandma's independence? Sandra couldn't help but smile slightly. Your parents are adjusting to some new information about me. You mean they're freaking out because they underestimated you? Mia translated with teenage bluntness. This time Sandra laughed outright. Something like that. Mia sipped her tea, then set the mug down. With deliberate care. I have questions. About you. About the army. Mom and Dad never talk about it, and when I ask, they change the subject. The request surprised Sandra. Neither of her grandchildren had shown much interest in her military career before. What would you like to know? Everything, Mia said simply. What you did, where you went, why you joined. Did you ever get scared? Did you ever kill anyone? The last question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Sandra considered her granddaughter thoughtfully, seeing not a child, but a young woman on the precipice of adulthood, seeking honest answers. That's quite a lot for one. Evening, Sandra said finally. But yes, I was scared many times. Fear isn't the problem. Letting fear control your decisions is the problem. And the other question? Mia pressed. Sandra met her granddaughter's eyes directly. Combat has many aspects, Mia. I served in areas where engagement with enemy forces was frequent. I did what was necessary to protect my unit. Mia nodded slowly, accepting the answer for what it was. Is that why you have the Bronze Star? For protecting people? You know about that? I Googled you, Mia admitted. There's an article about a mission in Afghanistan. You carried someone to safety under enemy fire. Sandra hadn't thought about that day in years, the dust thick enough to choke on, the weight of Specialist Rivera over her shoulders, the staccato rhythm of gunfire tracking their desperate progress toward the extraction point. She was one of my soldiers, Sandra said simply. Getting her home was my responsibility. That's badass, Mia declared. Then, more hesitantly, do you think, could I see your medals sometime? Sandra studied her granddaughter's face, finding genuine interest there. Of course. They're in my study. Would you like to see them now? Mia nodded eagerly, following Sandra down the hallway to the book-lined room where military memorabilia shared space with family photographs and Jack's old record collection. Sandra unlocked the glass-fronted cabinet where she kept her service medals, awards, and commemorative coins collected throughout her career. This is the Bronze Star, she explained, lifting the medal from its velvet backing. And this one is the Meritorious Service Medal. I received it for establishing a training program for Afghan women serving as interpreters for coalition forces. Mia listened with rapt attention as Sandra explained each item, asking thoughtful questions about deployment locations and military traditions. Her interest seemed sincere, unrelated to the recent revelations about Sandra's financial situation. Why didn't you ever tell us about all this? Mia asked finally, gesturing to the collection of service recognitions. Sandra replaced the medals, carefully. No one ever asked. The simple answer seemed to trouble Mia. She wandered to the wall of photographs, stopping at one showing a much younger Sandra in desert camouflage, standing beside a military vehicle. Is that why you got so quiet when Mom said that stuff at dinner, about you being a burden someday? Sandra's eyebrows rose. She hadn't realized Mia had been paying attention that night. That comment reflected your mother's misconceptions. Sandra said carefully, about my capabilities, my resources, and my past. It was mean, Mia said flatly. Even if you didn't have money or own buildings, it was just mean. People often fear what they don't understand, Sandra replied. Aging is something many people fear, especially those who measure their value by youth and appearance. Mia turned from the photographs. I want to join the army after college. The statement caught Sandra completely off guard. Since when? Since forever, Mia said, a hint of defiance in her voice. But Mom and Dad keep pushing me toward business, school. They say military service is for people who don't have other options. Sandra felt a flash of disappointment in her son. Jack would have been furious to hear military service dismissed so casually. And what do you think? She asked. I think they're wrong, Mia replied firmly. But I'm scared to tell them. That's why I came here. I thought, Maybe you could help me explain it to them. Sandra felt a complex emotion rise in her chest, pride in her granddaughter's courage mixed with concern about the difficult conversation ahead. I'd be honored to support you, Mia, but this needs to be your decision, for your reasons, not to prove something to your parents, and certainly not to be like me. It's not about that, Mia insisted. I want to do something that matters, something bigger than just making money. The words echoed Sandra's own thoughts from so many decades ago, when she'd enlisted against her parents' wishes. The parallels were striking. If you're serious about this, Sandra said, there's a lot to consider. Different service options, ROTC scholarships, officer candidate paths. I can help you navigate that. Mia's face brightened. Really? You're not going to try to talk me out of it? It's not my place to talk you out of following a calling, Sandra replied. But it is my responsibility to ensure you understand exactly what you're considering. Military service is rewarding, but it demands sacrifices. Like what happened to Captain Manning at the hospital. Mom told me about her. Sandra nodded. Physical injuries are only one type of sacrifice. There are also missed birthdays, relocations, relationships strained by distance. The military becomes your family in many ways. Like it was for you and Grandpa Jack? Yes. Sandra smiled at the memory. The Army brought us together. We understood each other's commitments and challenges in a way civilian couples sometimes struggle with. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing more easily than any they'd had before. When Mia finally checked her phone, she grimaced at the time. I should get home. Mom's texted like 12 times. I'll drive you, Sandra said firmly. It's too cold for the bus. During the drive to Michael and Rachel's house, Mia asked more. Questions about military life, scribbling notes in her phone about websites to research and books to read. As they pulled into the driveway, the front door opened immediately. Rachel stood framed in the doorway, her expression a mixture of relief and irritation. We'll continue this conversation, Sandra promised as Mia gathered her things. Think carefully about what we discussed. I will, Mia assured her. Thanks, Grandma, for listening, for not treating me like a kid. You stopped being a kid the moment you started making your own decisions, Sandra replied. That's something your parents will need to recognize sooner rather than later. Mia hurried inside, leaving Sandra to face Rachel, who approached the car with crossed arms, a defensive posture if Sandra had ever seen one. She came to see me, Sandra explained before Rachel could speak. She took the bus. She can't just disappear like that, Rachel said, her voice tight with lingering worry. We've been calling everywhere. She needed some space to think, Sandra replied. And some honest conversation. Rachel's expression shifted from concern to wariness. About what? Her future, her interests, things she doesn't feel comfortable discussing at home. And what exactly does that mean? Sandra considered how much to reveal. This was Mia's conversation to have with her parents, but they needed some preparation. It means your daughter is forming her own identity, Sandra said carefully. One that might not align with the path you've envisioned for her. As her parents, you can either support her exploration or drive her to hide her true aspirations from you. Rachel frowned. This sounds suspiciously specific. Talk to your daughter, Sandra advised. Really listen to what she wants, not what you want for her. She put the car in reverse. Good night, Rachel. As she drove home through the quiet streets of Harleston, Sandra found herself reflecting on the evening's unexpected developments. Mia's interest in military service would likely become another point of contention with Michael and Rachel. But the girl's determination reminded Sandra of herself at that age, certain about a path others couldn't understand. Perhaps that was the real legacy worth passing down, not buildings or bank accounts, but the courage to follow one's convictions despite opposition. The thought warmed Sandra against the November chill as she returned to her empty house, which suddenly felt a little less empty than before. The first real snow of the season arrived in early December, transforming Harleston into a postcard-perfect landscape of white-dusted colonial homes and twinkling holiday lights. Sandra cleared her walkway methodically, the familiar burn in her shoulders a welcome reminder of her body's continued strength despite the years. She had just finished when Lisa Delaney's car pulled into her driveway. "Colonel," Lisa called, navigating carefully across the freshly shoveled path. "Sorry to drop by unannounced. I was in the neighborhood for another appointment and thought I'd deliver these personally." She held up a manila envelope. "Come in," Sandra invited, propping her snow shovel against the porch railing. "I've just made coffee." Inside, Lisa settled at the kitchen table while Sandra poured them each a mug of the rich, dark brew. Steam rose between them as Lisa opened the envelope. "The signed lease agreement from RD Creative Solutions," she explained, sliding the document across the table. Ms. Miller requested a meeting to discuss some of the terms, but ultimately signed the standard contract without amendments. Sandra nodded, unsurprised. Rachel was too shrewd a businesswoman to jeopardize her company's location over pride. And the other tenants, all renewed at the new rates except Harrison Accounting. They're downsizing and relocating to a smaller space across town. That leaves how much vacant space on the second floor? "About 2,000 square feet, Lisa confirmed. "Prime corner suite with good natural light. Already have 2 interested parties, scheduled to view it next week." Sandra sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "Hold off on those showings. I have another potential tenant in mind." Lisa raised an eyebrow but didn't question further, instead changing the subject. "The Veterans Incubator space is coming along nicely. Contractors should finish the renovations by December 20th, right on schedule for a January opening." "Excellent. And the applications?" 17 so far, all veteran-owned businesses. We'll need to select the first 8 participants by year-end." Sandra nodded. "I'd like to review the applications personally." "Of course," Lisa agreed. "Though I should mention, one application might present a conflict of interest." She hesitated, then continued. "Tamara Jenkins and her husband, their physical therapy practice." "No conflict," Sandra said firmly. "All applications will be evaluated on their merits by the selection committee. I'll recuse myself from voting on Tamara's application specifically." Lisa smiled. "I thought you'd say that. I've already flagged it for the committee's special consideration. Without your input." After Lisa departed, Sandra went to her study with the signed lease agreement. She placed it carefully in her filing cabinet, a task that would normally conclude this particular business matter. Today, however, she found herself lingering, thoughts drifting to the changes taking shape across her various projects. The VA program directorship, the Veterans Business Incubator, Mia's newfound interest in military service, all threads weaving into a tapestry very different from the one she'd envisioned during those quiet years following Jack's death. She had spent so long in stealth mode, managing her investments quietly, keeping her accomplishments private, allowing others to underestimate her. The comfort of invisibility had become a habit, but habits could be broken when they no longer served their purpose. Sandra's phone chimed with a message. Michael had finally responded to her Thanksgiving invitation. "We'll be there. Rachel's cooking the turkey. Mia has something important to discuss." So the conversation was happening. Good. Sandra preferred directness to prolonged tension, even if it meant holiday disruption. She texted back a simple acknowledgement and started planning how to transform her dining room from its usual Spartan efficiency to something worthy of a family gathering. The following morning brought Sandra to downtown Harleston and her building on Oakwood Avenue. She nodded to the security guard as she crossed the lobby to the elevators. Today, she wasn't hiding her presence or making casual observations. Today, she had a specific purpose. She pressed the button for the 3rd floor, Rachel's domain. The elevator, Doors opened onto the familiar reception area of RD Creative Solutions. The same young receptionist looked up, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Colonel Miller," she greeted, more confidently than during their previous encounters. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Sandra replied pleasantly. "But I believe Ms. Miller will want to see me. Please let her know I'm here." The receptionist made a quick call, her expression shifting from uncertainty to surprise as she received her instructions. "Ms. Miller says to show you right in, ma'am." Rachel's corner. Office looked different today. Less aggressively stylish, more functional. Several design boards leaned against the walls, and a large table had replaced one of the decorative seating arrangements. Rachel herself rose from behind her desk, her usual polished appearance slightly mussed, as though she'd been running her hands through her hair. "Sandra," she greeted, gesturing to the visitor's chair. "This is unexpected." "I was downtown for a meeting at the VA," Sandra explained, taking the offered seat. "Thought I'd stop by to discuss the vacant space on the second floor." Rachel's posture stiffened slightly. "I wasn't aware there was vacant space available." "Harrison, accounting is downsizing. Their suite will be available January 1st. "I see," Rachel said carefully. "And you're telling me this because I'm considering offering it to you at the same rate as your current space," Sandra replied. "It's smaller than what you have now, but it would allow you to maintain your business in the building while reducing your overhead." Rachel's expression cycled rapidly through confusion, suspicion, and cautious interest. "That's generous. But why would you suggest I downsize?" "It's not about downsizing," Sandra corrected. "It's about right-sizing. Your current layout has excess space you're paying for but not utilizing effectively. The second-floor suite would eliminate that waste." Rachel leaned back in her chair, studying Sandra with new consideration. "You've been observing my operation." "I make it my business to understand my tenants' businesses," Sandra confirmed. "It's how I identify mutually beneficial opportunities." "And this would benefit you how, exactly?" Sandra appreciated the directness of the question. "It would allow me to expand the Veterans Incubator program to include part of the third floor, while keeping a successful tenant in the building. Win-win." Rachel's fingers drummed once against her desk, a habit Sandra had noticed emerged when she was calculating options. "I'd need to see the space, run some numbers." "Of course," Sandra agreed. "Lisa can arrange a showing at your convenience." An awkward silence settled between them. Rachel broke it first. "Michael told me about your conversation with Mia." Sandra kept her expression neutral. "Did he?" "Not details, just that she's considering military options." Rachel said the words as though they tasted strange on her tongue. "She's been researching service academies, taking practice ASVAB tests online. She's thorough," Sandra observed. "A valuable quality in any career." Rachel stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked downtown Harleston. "I don't understand it. She has every advantage. Excellent. Schools, connections through our network. A clear path to business school. Why would she throw that away to enlist?" "Officers don't enlist," Sandra corrected mildly. "They commission, and military service isn't throwing anything away. It's choosing a different path of value." Rachel turned back, frustration evident in her expression. "You put this idea in her head." "No," Sandra replied firmly. "Mia came to me because the idea was already in her head, but she felt she couldn't discuss it with you or Michael. There's a difference." "She's 17, Rachel protested. "She doesn't know what she wants." "At 17, I had already been accepted to West Point," Sandra countered. "Some people develop clarity of purpose early." Rachel ran a hand through her carefully styled hair, disrupting it further. "Michael thinks I should support her. That fighting her will only push her away." "He's right. Of course you'd say that," Rachel muttered. "You want her to follow in your footsteps." Sandra stood now, meeting her daughter-in-law eye to eye. What I want is irrelevant. This is about Mia making her own informed choices. If you oppose her interest in service without even trying to understand it, you'll damage your relationship in ways that might never heal. The words hung between them, weighted with the implied history of other relationships damaged beyond repair. Rachel seemed to grasp the subtext, her expression softening slightly. "I don't want to lose her," she admitted quietly. "Then don't make her choose between your approval and her aspirations," Sandra advised. "There's room for compromise. She could start with ROTC in college, see if the military is truly what she wants before fully committing." Rachel considered this, turning back to the window. "I'll think about it." After a pause, she added, "We're still bringing the turkey on Thursday?" Sandra recognized the tentative olive branch. "Yes, 1 o'clock." As she left the office building, Sandra found herself smiling slightly, not because she had won some victory over Rachel, but because the ground between them seemed to be shifting from contest to conversation. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was movement in the right direction. Thursday arrived with another light snowfall, dusting Harleston with fresh powder that glittered in the winter sunlight. Sandra had been up since dawn, preparing her home for the first family Thanksgiving she'd hosted in years. The dining room table, usually covered with paperwork or projects, had been polished to a high shine and set with her best china, the pieces she and Jack had collected during overseas postings. In the kitchen, her counters held more food than she typically prepared in a week. Cornbread stuffing made from her mother's recipe, roasted Brussels sprouts with bacon, homemade, cranberry sauce simmered with orange zest and cinnamon. The house filled with aromas that stirred memories of holidays past, when Michael was young and Jack was still alive, before distance, both geographic and emotional, had thinned family bonds to near invisible threads. The doorbell rang precisely at 1 o'clock. Sandra straightened her burgundy sweater, took a steadying breath, and opened the door to find her family clustered on the porch. Michael carrying wine bottles, Rachel balancing a covered turkey platter, Aiden holding a bakery box, and Mia bringing up the rear with a small gift bag. "Happy Thanksgiving," Sandra greeted them, stepping aside to let them enter. "Let me help with those." The initial awkwardness dissolved into practical matters of where to set dishes, how to carve the turkey, and which serving bowls to use. Aiden, now 16 and shooting up in height, hovered near the kitchen island, sampling everything within. "Reach. This stuffing is amazing, Grandma," he declared, reaching for another piece until Rachel swatted his hand away. "Wait until we're seated," she chided, though her tone lacked its usual edge. Mia hung back, watching Sandra with a new attentiveness. When their eyes met, the girl smiled, a quick, conspiratorial expression that suggested shared understanding. Sandra returned it with a subtle nod. Once seated around the table, Michael raised his wine glass. "Should we say something? A toast?" "To family," Rachel offered, surprising everyone with her initiation. "To absent friends," Sandra added, thinking of Jack and the empty chair she still sometimes set out of habit. "To new beginnings," Mia concluded, her gaze steady across the table. They ate in relative harmony, the conversation flowing more naturally than Sandra had anticipated. Aiden discussed his basketball team's prospects for the regional championships. Michael described a challenging client project that had finally come together. Even Rachel seemed more relaxed, complimenting Sandra's cooking with apparent sincerity. It was during dessert, pumpkin pie with fresh whipped cream, when Mia cleared her throat and straightened in her chair. "I have something I want to talk about," she announced, her voice only slightly betraying her nervousness. Michael and Rachel exchanged glances. Sandra set her fork down, giving her granddaughter her full attention. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about my future," Mia continued. "And I've decided I want to apply to the service academies. West Point specifically." Aiden's eyebrows shot up. "Like Army? For real?" Mia nodded firmly. For real. The silence that followed Mia's announcement wasn't hostile, just weighted with significance. Aiden looked between his parents, gauging their reaction. Michael set his wine glass down carefully, while Rachel pressed her napkin to her lips, buying herself a moment. "You're serious about this," Michael finally said. "Not a question." "Completely," Mia confirmed. "I've researched the application requirements. My GPA is competitive, but I need to strengthen my extracurriculars and physical fitness scores. And I'll need a congressional nomination." The specificity of her knowledge impressed Sandra. Mia had clearly done thorough homework beyond their initial conversation. Rachel leaned forward slightly. "West Point has a 5-year service commitment after graduation. Have you considered what that means?" 8 years total, actually, Mia corrected. 4 at the academy and 5 active duty afterward. And yes, I've thought about it extensively. "That's your entire 20s, Rachel pointed out. "While your friends are building careers, starting families, I'll be building a career too," Mia interrupted, her voice steady but determined. "Just a different kind." Michael touched his wife's arm gently. "We agreed to listen, remember?" The why exchange caught Sandra's attention, so they had discussed this beforehand, prepared themselves for Mia's announcement, rather than reacting cold. Progress. Rachel exhaled slowly. "You're right. I'm listening." Her tone suggested this was taking considerable effort, but she was trying. Mia reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded brochure, smoothing it on the table. "There's an Academy Day at Congressman Barrett's office next month. Information. Sessions about the application process, meetings with recent graduates. I'd like to attend." "And you want our permission," Michael concluded. "I want your support," Mia corrected, "but I'm going regardless." Sandra hid her smile behind her napkin. The girl had spine. Rachel studied her daughter for a long moment before speaking again. "This isn't what I imagined for you." "I know, Mom. But," Rachel continued, her voice softening slightly, "your grandmother and I have been discussing perspectives lately, about choices and respect." She glanced at Sandra, something like reluctant acknowledgement passing between them. "I can't pretend to understand this choice," Rachel admitted, "but I'm trying to respect that it's yours to make." Mia's shoulders relaxed visibly. "Really?" "We have conditions," Michael interjected. "You maintain your grades. You apply to at least 3 civilian colleges as backups. You speak with actual female officers about the realities of service, not just the recruitment brochures. Grandma can help with that last part," Mia said, looking to Sandra with hope in her eyes. Sandra nodded. "I can introduce you to several women currently serving, including Captain Manning. She's stationed at Fort Belvoir now, recovering well." "Agreed then," Michael said. "We'll attend this Academy Day together, as a family." The tension around the table dissolved like morning mist. Even Aiden seemed impressed by the unexpected turn of events. "Does this mean I get the car when Mia goes to West Point?" he asked, breaking the seriousness with teenage practicality. Everyone laughed, and conversation shifted to lighter topics as they finished dessert. When they moved to the living room for coffee, Sandra noticed Rachel lingering in the dining room, studying the photographs on the sideboard. Pictures of Sandra and Jack in uniform, deployment shots from various bases overseas. Michael as a child sitting proudly on his father's shoulders. He would have loved to see Mia following this path, Sandra said quietly, joining her daughter-in-law. Rachel nodded, touching the edge of a silver frame. "Michael says she has Jack's determination. I never really knew him. He was already gone when Michael and I started dating." "Heart attack at 62, Sandra confirmed. "Too young, too sudden. He was planning to teach ROTC at the high school after retirement." Mia never mentioned that. She wouldn't know. "We don't discuss Jack much as a family." Rachel turned to face Sandra directly. "That's our failing. There's a lot we haven't discussed." The acknowledgement hung between them. Not quite an apology, but an opening. "It's not too late to change that," Sandra suggested. Rachel nodded slowly. "I'm going to look at that second-floor space next week, and I'd like to learn more about your Veterans Incubator program, professionally speaking." Professionally? RD. Creative Solutions specializes in brand development and marketing strategy, Rachel explained. New businesses often struggle with those aspects. We could offer workshops for your veteran entrepreneurs. The offer caught Sandra by surprise. It was practical, beneficial, and indicated a level of engagement she hadn't expected from Rachel. "That would be valuable," Sandra acknowledged. "I'll connect you with the program director to discuss possibilities." "You're not the director?" Rachel seemed genuinely surprised. "No. I'll be running the VA's Female Veteran Transition Initiative starting in January. The incubator is a separate project." Understanding dawned in Rachel's eyes. "You're building a community, not just real estate investments." "I'm continuing a mission," Sandra corrected. "Military service doesn't end with retirement, just changes form." Before Rachel could respond, Mia called from the living room. "Mom! Grandma! Aiden's eating all the leftover pie." The moment of connection broke as Rachel smiled slightly. Some battles never end. They rejoined the family in the living room, where Michael was describing his latest client crisis with dramatic flair, while Aiden, indeed, worked his way through another slice of pie. Sandra settled into her favorite armchair, observing the scene with quiet satisfaction. Not perfect harmony, but genuine interaction, a foundation to build upon. As the afternoon waned, Sandra retrieved a small package from her study and handed it to Mia. "Something to support your preparations." Mia unwrapped it carefully to reveal a fitness watch, sleek, practical, military grade. "For tracking your physical training," Sandra explained. "West Point's entrance requirements are demanding. This will help you monitor your progress." "It's perfect," Mia breathed, fastening it to her wrist immediately. "Thank you." "There's more," Sandra continued, handing her a business card. "Lieutenant Colonel Victoria Hayes. She commands the ROTC program at Harleston University. She's expecting your call to discuss preparation strategies." Michael looked impressed. "You've been busy, Mom." "I believe in supporting worthy aspirations," Sandra replied simply. When the family finally prepared to leave as twilight settled over Harleston, the goodbyes were warmer than Sandra had experienced in years. Aiden actually hugged her, a quick, awkward teenage embrace that ended almost before it began. Mia lingered, promising to call about scheduling a visit with Colonel Hayes. Michael helped Sandra carry dishes to the kitchen while Rachel and the teenagers gathered their coats. "This went better than I expected," he admitted quietly. "Family takes work," Sandra replied. "On all sides." Michael hesitated, then added, "Rachel's been different since that night at the restaurant, more reflective. She even suggested we volunteer at the VA with you sometime." "Perspective shifts happen in unexpected ways," Sandra observed. As they stood in the doorway saying final goodbyes, Rachel surprised Sandra with a brief but genuine hug. "Thank you for hosting," she said. "And for the business suggestion. I'm looking forward to seeing the space." "I'll have Lisa call you tomorrow," Sandra assured her. After they departed, Sandra moved through her quiet house, tidying remaining dishes and restoring order with practiced efficiency. The day had unfolded in ways she couldn't have predicted. Weeks ago, when Rachel had carelessly labeled her a burden. In her study, Sandra opened her laptop to find an email from Dr. Winters confirming her January start date with the VA program. Another from Tamara Jenkins reporting that her physical therapy practice had been selected for the incubator program. Life reorganizing itself into new patterns of purpose. Outside, snow began falling again, soft flakes drifting past her window in the gathering darkness. Sandra thought of the many Thanksgivings she'd spent away from home during her military career, in desert deployments on bases overseas. separated from family by duty and distance. She had never felt sorry for herself during those years. Service came with sacrifice, but also with profound connection to something larger than individual comfort. Rachel and Michael were beginning to understand that now, through Mia's unexpected choice. Not fully, perhaps, but the first recognition was taking root. Sandra moved to her bedroom and opened the closet, pushing aside everyday clothes to reveal her dress uniform hanging in pristine condition at the back. She ran her fingers over the ribbons and insignia that told the story of her career in coded colors and shapes. Each one earned through perseverance, courage, and duty. None of them visible to those who had chosen to see only an aging woman, a potential burden. Their mistake had never been about underestimating her finances. It had been about underestimating her character, the same character forged through decades of service that had enabled her success in all areas of life. The following Monday, Sandra arrived at her building early. The winter morning was crisp and clear as she crossed the lobby, nodding to the security guard and maintenance staff. In the elevator, she pressed the button for the third floor with purpose. Rachel's assistant looked up in surprise as Sandra approached the reception desk. "Good morning, Colonel Miller. Ms. Miller isn't in yet?" "I'm not here to see Rachel," Sandra explained. "I need to use your conference room for about an hour. Ms. Delaney is meeting me here with the Veterans Program Committee." The assistant blinked, then quickly checked the schedule. "Of course, the large conference room is available. Would you like coffee service?" "That would be appreciated. Thank you." Sandra was setting up her presentation materials when Lisa arrived with 4 committee members, 2 men and 2 women, all veterans themselves, selected to oversee the incubator program's launch. They were reviewing application files when Rachel entered, stopping short at the unexpected gathering in her conference room. "I hope we're not disrupting your morning," Sandra said, rising to greet her. Rachel recovered quickly. "Not at all. I came in early to prepare for the space viewing at 10. "Perfect timing," Sandra replied. "We're just discussing the businesses selected for the first cohort, including a physical therapy practice that specializes in rehabilitation for wounded veterans." She gestured to the committee members, making quick introductions. Rachel shook hands all around, her professional poise firmly in place despite the surprise. "I understand you might be offering marketing workshops for our participants," one committee member said to Rachel. "That's a valuable contribution." Rachel glanced at Sandra, then nodded. "Yes, we're exploring possibilities. Small businesses often struggle with effective branding and market positioning, areas where my team has particular expertise." Expertise these veteran entrepreneurs desperately need, the committee member agreed. "Many have exceptional services but limited business experience." "Perhaps you'd like to join our discussion?" Sandra suggested, "since you'll be viewing the second-floor space afterward anyway." A month ago, Rachel might have invented an excuse, retreated to the familiar territory of her own domain. Today, she pulled out a chair and sat down. "I'd be happy to," she said, reaching for a file folder. "Tell me more about this first cohort." Sandra watched as Rachel engaged with the committee, asking thoughtful questions about the selected businesses and offering genuinely helpful suggestions about their market positioning. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. Some wounds healed slowly. But it was evolution. A recalibration of relationship based on newfound respect. As the meeting concluded and the committee members departed, Rachel lingered, studying the floor plans for the second-floor space spread across the conference table. "This could work," she admitted. "The layout is actually more efficient for our current team size." "I thought it might be," Sandra replied. Rachel traced the outline of the suite with one finger. "When you said I needed to right-size rather than downsize, that wasn't just about square footage, was it?" "Business is like military strategy," Sandra explained. "Proper positioning maximizes your effectiveness. Overextension weakens your operation." "Tactical advice from my landlord," Rachel mused, a hint of wry humor in her voice. Not what I expected when I signed the original lease. Life rarely gives us what we expect, Sandra replied. Usually it gives us what we need to learn next. Rachel gathered the floor plans, her expression thoughtful. Mia asked me to help her train for the West Point physical requirements. I haven't run in years. Start slow, Sandra advised. Consistency matters more than intensity at first. That's what the Army taught you? That's what life taught me, Sandra corrected gently. The Army just provided more opportunities to apply the lesson. As they walked together toward the elevator, Sandra felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Not triumph, but something more sustainable. The building around them was transforming, not just in physical space allocation, but in purpose and connection. Just as this family was slowly reforming around a new understanding of its oldest member. Not a burden after all, but a foundation. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button right now and share where you're watching from in the comments. I love bringing these powerful transformation stories to this channel, showing how women of all ages reclaim their power and respect. Did you have a moment when someone underestimated you, only to discover your true strength? Share your experience below. I read every comment and would love to hear your story. Remember, value isn't determined by others' perception. Sometimes the people closest to us need the strongest reminders of our worth. Next week, I'll be sharing another incredible story about a woman who turned rejection into her greatest success. You won't want to miss it. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Until next time, remember your power and keep inspiring others.